Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today on the Nonprofit Edge, we're joined by Stuart Wachs, founder and CEO of Impact Group. Stuart brings decades of experience leading and transforming nonprofit organizations into high-performing, mission-driven enterprises. Through his work with Impact Group, he helps nonprofit executives and boards create clarity of purpose, align teams around shared goals, and build the kind of culture that fuels both impact and sustainability. Our conversation today explores the power of a growth mindset in leadership, how to cultivate a strong organizational culture, why nonprofits must operate with the discipline of a business while staying true to their mission, and how to achieve true team alignment from the boardroom to the front line. Man, that's a lot to cover, but I'm excited to do so. So first and foremost, welcome to the show, Stuart.
Chris, thanks so much for the beautiful intro. And it is a lot to cover, but I guess we'll do our best. And so happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. I'm excited to dig in. I know that there is a lot of material to cover, and hopefully we'll do it in such a way that it will leave people wanting to learn more, and they'll reach out to you or to me and inquire. So let's get things going with a bit of intro question. If you wouldn't mind, Stuart, tell the audience a bit about your leadership journey in the nonprofit space. And particularly, I'd love to kind of know more about any mentors that you've had, why they were important, sure, and also any sort of leadership philosophy or concepts that really guide you in your own leadership or that you guide other people in theirs. So let me know what you think.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll do this relatively quickly. So I actually got into the nonprofit space completely by accident. I wish I could tell you it was a lifelong passion and that's what I went to school for, but none of that would be accurate. I got a degree in exercise science and business management, was waiting for a funded position at the Cleveland Clinic to come around, and had a little construction business I was doing, and a close relative in Cleveland, I was living in Cleveland, my hometown at the time, told me about this job at a nonprofit, Jewish Community Center. And it was a real job with a real salary that I had to have my college degree for. So I'm like, what the heck, let me go. And I don't remember what the title was. It was something in the wellness fitness area.
Programmatic.
Pardon?
It was programmatic.
Yeah, it was programmatic. I was brought in to help create and do some programming and implement programming in the fitness recreation field. Cool title, but I was, entry level, going to do what I do and learn. Yeah. And I'm a big believer that things happen for reasons. It was Bashir, it was a gift from God. It was whatever your one's belief system are.
Love it.
And here's why I say that. Number one, I quickly got a passion for how it could still fulfill my kind of business growth building things, but do it in a way that I was impacting so many people with real mission and purpose behind it. And fortunately for me, it was a nonprofit that what I was doing was all earned revenue. So it was still building business units and programming and direct service. And so anyways, I fell in love with it, did that quickly, kind of worked my way up and was successful. And I'll now keep the story going, but I'll touch on the mentor piece. I kind of developed a reputation as someone that could really grow revenue and really manage and build culture and the people side of things to do that. And there's an organization in Detroit that was needing a turnaround. They hired a CEO who knew of me. So he brought me in as his COO to basically help grow everything revenue-wise and do everything people and culture-wise and kind of put me in my sweet spot and let me soar. And it was my first seat on executive team. And David Sorkin was the CEO's name. Great guy, still keep in touch with him to this day. And he was a mentor because he let me do my thing. He didn't tell me how to do it. He told me what the goals were, but he was always there for me, whether
Right.
that was a kick in the rear or a pat on the back. Always available for wisdom or guidance, always being willing to take risks. So it really taught me a lot about leadership, and especially leadership at that level. And I remember I was then recruited for my first CEO's job. And I remember David sitting me down, and I thought he was full of it when he told me this. He goes, Stuart, congratulations, so happy for you. He goes, I have two pieces of advice. He goes, number one, just know it's very lonely in that seat. And having not sat in it yet, I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Right. Right.
And his other piece of advice was just remember, no matter what, no matter how good of friends they are and everything, end of the day, you're an employee and the board is a board. And that wasn't in a negative, it was in an awareness standpoint because
Very
one
good.
can go astray. And I thought, yeah, whatever. And both were sage advice. From that, I still had great friends on boards of directors, worked amazingly well with them with
Right.
me. But I already always understood that dynamic. And I also really grew to understand what he meant by loneliness in the CEO seat
Yep.
and how I would need to have mentors, coaches. And that's when I started myself using coaches because there's only so much you can share.
Right.
So that led to it, and I then led a few other good-sized nonprofits and turnarounds. Cut my tooth and became a pretty good fundraiser as well as you have to do in that environment.
No doubt.
And yeah, I say it was a blessing to do that for all those years. I was constantly in university, learned so much from different board members, different staff people, different donors. Got to do so many different things and continually grow while I was growing what I was doing, and always feeling not that I didn't have my bad days, but great about what we were doing. So it was a great way to come into my profession accidentally and really create a tremendous passion for what we could do and what all nonprofits have the capability to do.
Yeah, yeah. And now, as a consultant and coach, and leader of leaders, you've often talked about the importance of adopting a growth mindset in leadership. And, what does that mean in the nonprofit context?
Yeah, this is like one of my passions, and a lot of what I even do when I work with, be it boards, leadership teams, a strategic retreat, ongoing work, is a lot of mindset work. And nonprofits, um, I think unfortunately, and it's been forced on them over decades, there's certain mindsets that really hold them back, keep them from thriving, revenue wise, impact wise. And one of them that nonprofits tend to have a scarcity mentality, scarcity of how many donors out there, of revenue, of staff, of resources. And that's really unfortunate. Yeah, it's tough. But switching it over to an abundance mindset, whether you're a privately held company or a nonprofit or in your personal life, is just so powerful. So that's to me the first step of that growth mindset is understanding that if we want to really achieve our mission, hit our BHAG, hit our vision, fulfill our purpose, our why, we've got to have an abundance mindset that yes, there's nonprofits that compete with us for donors and constituents. And maybe right now we have limited resources, but there's no reason you have to have limited resources. There's no, I know we'll touch on this later, no difference than growing a business with an abundance mindset and a growth mindset. You start looking at how and then the who to deliver that how and begin developing the models and the infrastructure, and you throw in the garbage what has destroyed nonprofits, this warped mindset that overhead is a bad thing,
Right.
because it is not. You want to be efficient and effective and efficient, but depending on what you're doing, overhead maybe it should be 90%, maybe it should be 20%. But you change in a growth mindset on what are we going to do? What are we going to focus on? What are we going to invest in? So yes, we can grow revenue, we can grow cash, and we can grow profit.
Yep.
Because no money, no mission, as icky as it may sound, is true. And
Yep.
from that, we can grow scope, deeper impact, wider impact, whatever that vision is, and really adapting that mindset and putting principles and procedures and process and methodologies behind it is what can lead to. I know it was what helped the nonprofits I turned around and grow, and I know it's how I help those that I work with.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great overview, of that concept. So now as we think about having leaders encourage that growth mindset among teams that are obviously stretched thin, working in high pressure environments and yet mission driven environments. How can leaders encourage that growth mindset from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it starts and it depends on the size of the nonprofit and what their structure is on my staff. But if assuming they're big enough where they do have a leadership team of at least two or three,
Yep.
really starts from that leadership, that leadership team of getting that leadership team really clear. They're three, four, five, eight of them, whatever it is. They're all really aligned on. I love Colin's work and work off of the BHAG, the big hairy audacious goal, that North Star, that not here's what we're going to try to do. Not here where we might be in 20 years. This is who we're going to be and what we're going to be in 20
Okay.
years.
Gotcha.
Getting alignment around that, and then all the foundational work of purpose and values, and then really creating strategy, goals, and execution plans where you can see the steps to achieve it. And once you have and I'm simplifying this, but once you have that whole leadership team really aligned and there's ownership and accountability and all this stuff, which I know we'll touch on, and then you cascade that through the organization. So
Okay.
if there's a next tier of department heads or executive management or whatever that structure is, that you share. I'm a big believer that about 99% of what the CEO and COO and chief program officer and chief want to know, the guy or gal cleaning the bathroom, frontline programmer, all the way through everybody should know everything other than that small thread of confidential stuff. Share that, share where you're going, share where you're at, share why you will get there and how together. And then whether it's through OKR or KPI or metrics, make sure everybody sees whatever their role or position is, how they impact the organization, getting in there and what they can do to be part of this amazing story. I remember I was leading an organization once. I know we're gonna get to people and culture, but we implemented this and we lived and breathed this. And we had a custodian, janitor that worked there, full-time guy, great guy. Ended up getting our employee of the year or whatever we called it. I can't remember, it was some time ago. But he knew how we treated people, treating every interaction like it can change the world. Like that was the essence of who we were and how we were going to grow. And one of the things we had was a preschool operation, no direction. And actually, he could have been yelled at or fired for it. Most of the preschool parents would come in at, I don't know, 8 o'clock, let's say. He put down his broom, put down his stuff, and he went out there and for a half an hour was a doorman and helped with strollers and bags, really disregarded his job. But because we all knew we were aligned, we all knew we were living with our values, he saw how by doing that,
Yeah.
he was going to help grow our organization. So sharing, making sure it's based on those values and everybody sees their place, people will buy into it and they'll see how what they do can grow and help us achieve that mission, serve the people we're serving,
Interesting.
have the revenue and the money and everything else to do it. So it's having that story woven and that feeling throughout everything that you're doing.
That's interesting. I fell into a trap, I think, thinking that growth mindset was financial, from the perspective of money. Oh, I have to have a growth mindset in terms of metrics, but goals, but probably all about money. And then that story that you just shared was kind of more cultural growth mindset, which I think is fantastic because we can't always limit our thinking to the dollar because
Yeah.
sometimes it's the other things that you need to focus on that will then ultimately lead to the dollar.
Bingo. I'm so glad you picked up that. And I appreciate that, Chris. And there was a study done some time ago that looked at purpose-driven. This was actually in the for-profit space, purpose-driven for-profits, and then your traditional Fortune 500. And it showed them through dips in economies. And this was before COVID, so COVID wasn't
Right.
part of the example, but those types of things. And it showed how purpose-driven companies, those that still, they were private companies, they wanted to make a lot of money, whether they were shareholders, whether it was owner distributions, whether it was to sell, but they focused on growth of everything and the growth mindset you just described. And those are the companies that took a bigger initial dip, but came out of it way quicker and way stronger. Because really, it is all focusing on money,
Yeah.
isn't having a strategy, knowing what you're measuring, what has to happen to drive that money and drive that cash is important. But culture and people and awareness and everybody being aligned and building trust and letting people go do what they have to do, that's going to get you your money. And
I
that
love
money
it.
is going to let you reinvest and expand how you fulfill your mission.
Yeah, yeah. And what we've been talking about really talks to the culture of an organization. So let's move into that realm now. And you've led several large organizations through culture transformation. What are the first steps to building a culture that truly supports performance and well-being?
Yeah. I'm going to share some of the steps and I'll share a couple personal stories of failures that were some of the best learning opportunities
Yeah,
I ever
please. Great.
had. So, some people say culture trumps strategy. I don't say that because they're both important. But if you don't have a strong, positive culture, you might grow. You will not grow as fast. You'll have a lot more pain, and you'll never get to deliver the impact to the degree you want to. It is fundamental in any organization.
Mhm.
So my approach has always been starting with making sure you know your why. Whether you do that through mission or you do that through purpose, that whether you start with the board and leadership. Um, I'm a big believer actually comes there. Yes, you integrate and utilize different teams and multi-level, but really it is the board and or leadership, or ideally them together, that really should create that and align that. Because it's not a democracy as to what the mission, purpose, and values of an organization are. So
Right.
really making sure it's there, it's articulatable, and that purpose, your why, really drives you. Um, then you work that through your staff where you all know it. And I had done that really successful a couple of times, but I always felt that it was still so dependent on me, Stuart Wachs, me, the CEO. And I was like, there's got to be something where when I leave, it could all crumble.
Right.
And that's
Right.
that's an insult to me, not a compliment to me.
Yeah.
Um, and the last big turnaround I did in the nonprofit space as a CEO, I'm like, I want to really do this where it gets integrated and systematized, where I can disappear unless someone intentionally wants to stop it, just keep going. And that's when I really did some more studying and learning and reaching out to people. At the end of the day, it comes down to behaviors. We've all been the places where they list their values on the wall and you're going,
Sure.
might be up on the sign, but it's not happening. So
Yeah.
what I then started doing, and I coach nonprofits, organizations on this, is yes, you have to have those values, those three, four, maybe five, non-compromising. You hire on them, you fire on them. They're non-negotiables. Don't
Mhm.
call them values unless they're non-negotiables, from CEO to 1 hour a week part-timer. But then you identify maybe three, four behaviors that if you're doing that, you're living each of those values. So now you've got your 20 behaviors, and you start systematizing that, a behavior a week, using those behaviors in your coaching, using those behaviors in your employee review, using those behaviors in your orientations, and all of a sudden just work. We did this, and we had a little fold out booklet of our 22 behaviors that we sent home so people could share them with their wives. We did a big kickoff with it, et cetera, et cetera. We had a
Great.
regular rhythm and ritual. And my COO, on a weekend, was at the beauty parlor and saw one of our part-time staff, and they started talking about something personal. And this part-time staff on a weekend day pulled out our fundamentals pamphlet from her pocket and said how that helped her do whatever this personal thing like. And I was like, we're there.
Yeah.
So it has to start at the top. It has to be real. It can't be lip service. If you, the CEO, ED, leadership team, and board aren't willing to hold those accountable, if you stumble, admit it at work, they're not values. And then the behavior part, and just finding ways to systematize that where it just truly becomes part of your culture, part of how you act every day. And next thing you know, it's just living. and peers will push other peers out. They'll be self-policing, and it really just becomes organic to the organization.
And is that what helps it survive the leadership transitions or organizational change? Because it seems like, boy, then you bring in a new CEO or a new leadership team and they have to buy in. They have to, I mean, how do you encourage or prevent backsliding when it comes to
Yeah,
these
great.
strong
So,
culture?
as I know you and everybody listening knows, there's, I guess death and taxes, I think, are the only guarantees. Um, but there is no guarantee. And this is where I'm a big, especially if it's a somewhat of a large organization, it's the leadership team that really should be driving everything. The board is there to help with strategy and make sure we're achieving our mission and helping resources. But the board has to play a pivotal role because at some
Good,
time,
good.
there's going to be a changeover of the executive director, CEO, whatever they call the head of the organization, staff of the
Right.
organization position. And if the board is bought into that, believes in it, knows how it's been systematized, hopefully there's no chance that that new CEO, because they're going to hire based on those values, based on those behaviors, and even if the guy or gal that's their lead candidate is the best in the world, if they don't prescribe to, emulate, and have demonstrated they do, they shouldn't be hired because that should be your number one criteria. So hopefully the board knows it, they're hiring based on it. So when they hire the new CEO or ED, they have someone that wants it. They know this is a critical measurement. There's actually metrics you put with it. So that's the same as any fundraising metric or earned revenue metric or uh, uh, engagement metric, and then it will live on. But in nonprofits, you really do need both board leadership and staff leadership all engaged in it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think everybody needs to hear that. They're the backstop, if you will, has to be that board
100%, yeah.
to provide some level of consistency between leadership teams that are, bound to change over time.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I
great point.
understand that some leader or leadership team has to build the system, then train the board how to maintain it once they're no longer in charge. So great.
Yeah.
Um, you've talked about the difference between culture fit and culture contribution. Is there a distinction in your mind between those two things?
I mean, they're very synergistic. I guess by my definition and the way I look at that lens, culture fit is something you're going to do when you're evaluating that board member, that staff person,
Okay.
that volunteer. Because I, as a leader, did this, and I stress this when I'm coaching with leadership teams or boards. That's how important it is. It's more important than the resume. So culture fit is something you're going to use when onboarding and evaluating anybody you're bringing into the organization, and you're going to measure along the way. It's kind of that A player measurement where you've got this axis is culture fit
Yep.
and this axis is performance. Ideally, you want
Yep.
them up in the upper right quadrant where they're high on both.
Yep.
So it is something you're going to always measure. And if there is a culture fit, there almost always is going to be a cultural contribution that what they're doing, others they bring in. And I guess and then another part of it is cultural contribution is the things you're doing, who you're partnering with, how you're branding, how you're messaging. Is that a fit? Does that align with your overall culture, your
Wow.
values, your
Great.
purpose, and your mission? So that might be another place where that cultural contribution comes in. All of those things should contribute to that. And I neglected to say this at the beginning of the conversation about culture and values. It's 100% internal and external.
Okay.
It's not
Good.
something you only do for your clients, constituents, for donors, or something you only do for your employees, board members, or volunteers. Everybody's the same. Everybody's in the same bucket. And the expectations of living it and the
Mm,
delivering upon it and living that way should be the same.
good. Good. That's a critical piece I'm glad you added because I think it's tempting for any leader to say, well, this is all about me, my team, and my staff. And then they neglect, let's say, the community or neglect the board or neglect donors or neglect a lot of people. So
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah.
sharing
And
that.
even and not or, and vice versa. They've got all these beautiful values and way they're going to behave, and they expect, especially if you're a nonprofit that's doing direct service to people, that the staff treat all those constituents, those they're serving, and then you have a constituent that berates and beats verbally or in other ways on a staff member. Well, if you put up with that,
Yeah.
oh, that's not good and you're not living your value. So yeah, absolutely it needs to fly in all directions and sink in both directions.
Yep. Great. Great. All right. So we get the chance now to transition into the idea of nonprofits as a business. And I think anyone that's ever been a nonprofit executive director, CEO, or president knows that it's a real business with real complexities. And the goal is to make a profit, a margin that can be turned into impact. I was talking to a conference, giving a presentation about the difference between for-profits and nonprofits. And my key takeaway was one, and this is very limiting, but number one is that nonprofit is just a tax code, right? And I
Yes.
don't want to steal any thunder,
No,
but
that's you steal away. You're good.
just a tax code, right? Nonprofits need to generate revenue and profit, and that it shouldn't be called the nonprofit sector because it's a total misnomer. It
Yes.
should be called the for-purpose sector. So you have
Abs I love it.
for-profit and for-purpose, right? So
Yep.
with that being said, let's jump in and say many nonprofit leaders struggle with the idea of running their organization like a business for some good reasons, because there's an ugliness to the for-profit world that doesn't exist or shouldn't exist in the nonprofit world. But how do you define that balance between mission and margin?
Yeah. Well, you just said it all. So no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right,
I
right.
love what you said, Chris. And you did take someone I was saying, but
Well,
it's better
piggyback
coming
on
from
that.
you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So yes, absolutely. And I work with both. I've run both. I've run and sold a business, so I do know both sides. There really is no difference other than what you're doing with the profits. They're, God bless shareholder value and owner distribution. That's how your big donors have money
Right.
to give those beautiful
Right.
donations.
It's got to be
But
encouraged.
yeah, but in our case, when we're running and growing and scaling and maintaining and thriving in a nonprofit space, those profits give us that cash. Money's a good thing to reinvest. And
Yes.
some of this is that running like a business. I touched on the whole overhead thing and how ridiculous. On that one, if anybody listening has not listened to the Dan Pallotta
Yeah.
TED Talk, it's probably 10, 15 years old. It still resonates, and it's
Still
a
relevant.
guy that came from Fortune 500 nonprofit and talks about paying nonprofit leaders the same as in the market and how you market and how bad it's well worth every board member,
And now
every
there's a
nonprofit
movie,
leader listens to.
Uncharitable, that speaks into the same philosophy or need to eliminate this concept of overhead as
Yeah,
being needing to be small or
yeah.
unimportant.
Yeah. So feeding off of that, so some of it of running it like a business or not saying it's not a business is exactly that. Your job, your goal, your charge as an executive director, CEO, whatever your title is as the head of that nonprofit, is to maximize impact, whatever that means for that organization. Well, in creating the plans and the strategy and deciding what your structure is and the functions and the staff, that just as if it was to maximize revenue and sell the most widgets, it's the same approach. You're just different outcomes. So really, truly having a strategy that's aligned and knowing where you're going to be in 3 years and being articulated and knowing and having true, real expectations. Nonprofit staff are not the clients or the constituents. It doesn't mean, like in any well-run business, that they're not treated wonderfully and there's an
Right.
amazing supportive culture, but there should be ownership. There should be accountability. There should be clarity on if I'm successful, this is what success looks like for every position as well as for the organization. There should be things you're measuring to know you're getting there.
Yep.
Measure what matters. If you don't measure it, it doesn't happen.
Yep.
Um, so taking what are seen as business practices, articulated strategy, execution systems, accountability, communication cadence, mapping out your cash, you knowing what drives it and what preserves it, apply equally for any organization, be they a for-profit or nonprofit, to thrive and maximize impact and have compounding growth, all of which are good things. It's okay to use those words. It's great for everybody to talk about money and talk about profit and talk about impact. This is when we were talking about values and culture and growth. No, your purpose, your goal is not the money. But one of your goals is the money. If you have earned revenue streams, how are you maximizing that top line revenue and that bottom line revenue? In fundraising, how are you being the most effective to maximize that number and have the most leftover net in it? So it's really that mindset, and I don't want to beat it too much and really destroying. Don't let your board talk about it. Don't let your donors or granting organization drive you to some fixed overhead number. I mean,
Right.
I'm
Thank
going
you.
back in time. I think it's gotten better, but it used to be any nonprofit with an overhead more than 20% was poorly run and wouldn't get a good rating.
Oh,
And we all know what happened. Everybody played the games and how you allocate different people's
for
time.
sure.
Just do what you got to do to be able to invest so you're continuing growing, to make sure you're spending those really important resources, human and cash, on the things that are going to, yes, directly serve, but also allow you to grow. I remember one nonprofit that I coach, it's a veterans organization. They had a major disease of fixation on this overhead number. Because the reality was, they were really putting out, I don't know what it was, 88 cents of every dollar was going
Yeah,
into a
of
veteran's hand.
course. How often do you see that? Yep.
Yeah, but which is beautiful. It sounds great. It sounds like you're wonderful. But through coaching and process and some great leadership on their part, they realized, boy, wouldn't it be better for 70 cents of every dollar if that led to $2 million in veterans' hands
That's right.
instead
Do the
of
math.
88% do the math. So that which is a lot of the Pilates stuff. So a
Yeah.
lot of that mindset, that is really looking at it as a business or just as a well-run organization.
Yeah.
Everything I almost with my coaching and my work with private held companies and nonprofits, there's nuanced difference, especially if there's a board involved. But it's basically the same thing. All of them should be treating their people great internally and externally. All of them should be purpose driven. All of them should be strategic and nailing execution and be in some way enriching the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love all of the different business principles that you laid out that should be intentionally embraced, that are very similar to the for-profit world. I think surprisingly, um, the responsibility of boards to guide these companies strategically and
Mhm.
maintain oversight of the CEO. Some of these things are just so consistent across the two different sectors.
Yeah, yeah.
The way that you need to treat staff and help them achieve their own, personal professional objectives, the way that you have to take care of the customer, the way you have to market. There's so many um,
Yeah.
similarities. Yeah. So, I mean, it is absolutely the case that for-profit businesses and for-purpose businesses are run with the same ideas in mind. And I loved what you said about the simplicity of saying that the for-purpose side of the equation, the nonprofits, are all about just reinvesting their profits into more mission, however that is
Right.
achieved, as opposed to distribution to shareholders, distribution to ownership, right? So I love that. Where do you see the sort of business mindsets that don't translate well between the for-profit world and the for-purpose world? You've run companies in both sides. Where are there clear distinctions as you run those companies, those business enterprises?
Yeah. Um, Some is just how you build the revenue models, because there's things you can do in the
Perfect.
for-profit side that you either can't or are more difficult in the nonprofit side. Some is an aspect of modeling, because again, in that I never worked in a public, so I'll leave out shareholders, but in a private company, you are doing it. Hopefully you love your employees, you're trying to build their lives, you love your customers, you're paying everybody really well, you're giving your customers great value, but ultimately you're trying to build a value for you and your family.
Right.
So the buildup of that cash, doing certain things to build the valuation if you were to sell the company,
Yep.
um, yes,
Perfect. Yeah.
ultimately are part of growth, but so there's nuances as to where some of your focuses are,
That's
some
great.
of your financial and operational strategies. Um, so there, I'd say apps, and in the nonprofit side, you have which I know sometimes can be conflicting and painful, but boy, when it's harmonious and joyful, that syncing of the board and CEO, and then that through is very different. Even in a privately held company, it's a very different relationship. Whether it's a shareholder board or an investor advisor board, it's a very different relationship. So there's nuances of that have to go into how you're growing, both how you manage that, but also how you magnify that. Because you know, you talk to every ED or CEO, they'll have horror stories, and every board chair,
Sure.
and they'll have wonderful stories. So it's how do we do better to keep it in the wonderful side? So there's that complexity of board, volunteer, community focus lenses people look at them from a messaging marketing standpoint that is definitely different between the two. And that's where I usually, tweak things, modulate kind of what I do. That is a difference. And I'll say, having been in both sectors and having friends that have been in both sectors, and everybody I know would agree, it's actually much tougher to be a nonprofit CEO than a for-profit CEO. There
I
are
agree.
exceptions,
I agree.
clearly,
Yeah.
but it is actually, I believe, a more challenging, complex position to be in.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard so many talk about the reality that nonprofits are in two businesses as well. They're in the mission delivery business, which um, is separate from revenue, since you're not buying widgets,
Yeah, yeah,
and don't have different means of production. But you're in the mission delivery business, so you have a sort of programmatic side that has an economy to it, and then you have the fundraising or revenue generation side, which has a separate kind of almost pay scale as well, and economy to it. And along those lines, I mean, one of the most surprising differences for a lot of for-profit people, especially board members who come into this world new, is this idea that you don't compensate
yeah.
fundraisers through
Oh,
commission, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so that's just mind-blowing to so many people. You mean there's people that raise money just on salary and maybe a bonus for performance, but not on compensation? It's mind-blowing to them because all of their sales people are paid on
Yeah, that's
commission,
the
right?
main. Yeah, they get their salary, but their main. Yeah, let me. I'm glad you brought that up. Let me touch on a couple quick things on compensation. Um, and this is, I think, always as a CEO, definitely as far back as my memory can go. If I was hiring a CFO, I did not benchmark it against other nonprofits in the city. I benchmarked it against other organizations, the size and scope and complexity of what we were. And that's because I wanted the best CFO I could get. A
Mhm.
lot of times boards have challenge with that. Sometimes CEOs and EDs have challenges with that. But there's no reason that a CEO, ED, CEO, compare a CDO and maybe a chief revenue officer, wherever you want to make those correlations, similar size, similar complexity, they should be paid the same
Very
because you
good.
want
Yeah.
those kind of results. Because it doesn't mean that person doesn't have a heart. It doesn't mean because you have a heart and a passion, you shouldn't get paid a fair salary. You might choose to donate a chunk of it back. God bless. But if you're running it like an efficient operation, people should be paid fairly based on market value. And I believe it's the obligation of the board
Yep.
and of the staff leader of the organization, that's part of that investment, as part of their growth, to get their revenue to a point where they can do that, because then their revenue soars. because they've got a real A-player leadership team and mid-level because people are being paid fairly or they're not leaving because of it. They're
Right.
psyched, they're rolling, and they're still passionate. And then what they're being paid doesn't even matter. And I'm a big believer in incentive bonuses. I've always done those for senior leadership. I've done it
Right.
for other levels. Yeah, there's complexities and regulations on the fundraising side, but you can find ethical, moral, legal ways to even on the development side to incent that person to achieve and surpass those
Yeah.
goals.
And for everybody out there, this isn't even a foreign concept. This is real and necessary. Just the other day, I received through Fulcrum, our membership organization, we have a concierge service. Someone can ask questions, request documents, get
Uh,
in touch with other members, and they requested a compensation plan for executives
uh,
that shared how certain key executives would be bonused based on, the achievement of certain KPIs and whatnot.
yeah.
And so we were able to source some plans and share that back. And it's just so common and necessary. And as long as the plan is well thought out and doesn't
Yeah.
violate any ethical
Yeah. Correct.
issues,
Correct.
it's such a win for nonprofits to be able to fairly and accurately compensate
Yeah. I love that.
executives and all staff,
Yeah.
because the turnover can just
Yeah.
end an organization.
It can. It's a bear. It's a battle. It's incredibly rewarding, the work. Hopefully, should be at all levels. But there's a lot of demands outside of the normal demands. And then if you're getting paid 25% less than if you're doing it somewhere else, even if you have a pay, at some point that understandably and rightfully wears on that individual. And
Yeah.
it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
come on,
someone has a skill set, pay them for
that's
it.
right. Making 25% less for a 50% harder job doesn't
Yeah,
make a
yeah,
lot of sense, no matter
yeah.
how fulfilling it is.
Exactly. Yeah. Amen to that.
All right.
100%.
Well, let's end on the area of team alignment. Okay. So your work with leadership teams to build alignment around vision, values, and strategy is so important. In your mind, what are kind of signs that a team is truly aligned, and share with us signs where a team is not aligned?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I was having a conversation earlier where because a lot of what I do involves strategic planning. I think strategic planning, in many ways, understandably, has a bad connotation because they become these binders that sit on a shelf and is it really worth the time and money? And
Not good ones.
find others. That's not at all my approach, and it's so different that I keep thinking about. I want to call it something different. And
Yeah.
one of the things I talked about, and I'm glad you're being alignment, is almost everything I do. There's an element of alignment to it.
Very good.
Um, Team can be an overused word. Alignment is never overused. So it starts, and I'll use a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. I love his stuff. And it has kind of a pyramid, a hierarchy of how you get there. But first, to get to where you can really have alignment, and if you don't have alignment on a leadership team, you're not going to have the organization because you have these leaders that are running your different divisions, doing different things, saying different things. So the first place to start always, whether you have two people or eight people on that leadership team, is that you build trust. And trust is trust in each other,
Mm.
trust that each other are going to do what they say they do when they're going to do it and do it in high fashion. If they can't, they're going to be open and say it. Trust is that everybody has learned and developed the trust with each other where they will challenge. You will have real constructive debate and disagreement. But because of the trust you've built and the alignment where you're going, the only people who ever know that's happening are the people in that room because you have complete alignment once you're out of those discussions. So a lot of the work I'll do a little bit in a strategic repo when I'm working on an ongoing basis with leadership teams. There's a whole progression of things I do that some are obvious, some are just built into the way we're doing work that slowly but continually build that level of trust to where you get to that really high function team. And anytime you get a new team member, you literally have to start over again because now you have a new part of that family that you have developed trust with and they do. So signs that they aren't. I'll tell you, there's a couple. I'll give away a little bit of some of my secret sauce stuff I do. Usually when
Good.
I'm working with a company and we
Just
get
giving a little
into,
taste. This is
yeah, a little taste. That's all. When we get into the strategy work, I'm big on post-it notes and moving and get everybody thinking, typical facilitator stuff.
color
Um,
charrette and
yeah, exactly. So I say, okay, everybody take a post note. No cheating, no group work here. One word, write down one word that describes your strategy. Again, not the exact strategy, but that describes your strategy. And I will tell you, I've done this a bunch. Typically, but not always, the CEO will have perfect, aligned, solid, executable. You have a couple other members of the team that say that, but much softer because there isn't the trust and they're not willing to go against it.
right.
And then you might have one person that puts unknown, non-existent. So number one, they're clearly not aligned, and there clearly isn't really trust. I love when you have one person, founder, CEO, ED, that puts that real positive, and everybody else on the team says something different because then there's that trust, and the CEO is totally okay with it and laughs about it. So I mean, that's a little exercise, but you really know if you're there or not.
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Like when there isn't alignment, when
Mhm.
there's misalignment,
Mhm.
and for example, I write down collaborative,
Mhm.
and then everyone else writes down siloed. you know,
Uh,
like when there's misalignment, how do you handle that? Like what are some steps to create
yeah.
better alignment?
Yeah. One, and this is honestly a sales pitch. And I 99% am not a consultant, even though I have a lot of expertise and experience in the nonprofit space. I really try to purely be a coach.
Yep.
And by having the real power of a coach, a lot of people think coaches are for people that aren't performing well or yes, but the real power comes when you're a coach, when you're working with super high performer,
Right. Right.
staff, just like your elite athletes, your NFL teams, your MLB teams, they're at the upper one millionth of 1%, and
Yeah.
they
Never
have
met an
multiple
Olympian without a
coaches.
coach.
Yeah.
Never
So by
met.
having someone in there like me or another great coach, they can help uncover those blind spots and facilitate it. And what happens then? You have a dialogue, like in that example, which happens all the time. If they are a or close to an A player team and they have at least a decent level of trust, they'll laugh, they'll call themselves out, and then we'll start working on what really is reality. And usually it's the unknown, unclear, and then how do we start fixing? So it's creating that space, and you can do it without a coach. Coach helps and expedites it, to where you can have those dialogue. Again, it starts with the ED or CEO or
Yeah.
president,
Yeah.
because if they're ego based and it's all about them and they know everything, then don't hire me, don't use a coach, and good luck. Um, but if it's an ED ahead of that org that really wants a powerful leaders team and wants to grow and is open minded and desires to absolutely not be the smartest person in that room, then through process, through all these really meaningful process discussions that get down to owning different things, and then really for the CEO or ED to I don't want to say empower because I don't think you can empower anybody, but create an environment where they're going and doing. I just had this conversation with a client, I think yesterday, is they were telling me, no, my leadership team is all A players, and they're not really. Um, but yeah, I tell them what has to be done. I tell them how to do it. I tell them like, yeah, well, either you're not being a good leader or they're not A players. Because if you have A players, you align, here's the goal, and they decide how to do it and make it happen, and they'll come back. So there's all these little elements that will tell you where you're at in that
Yeah.
projection. And
Yeah.
never are you there because you continually have to keep reiterating it. And then you start building that trust. You have clarity of who owns what. You let them really own it and report on it. And eventually you get into this really high performing
That's great.
team that can nail what it is you're trying to nail.
Yeah, I interviewed a CEO yesterday for our Lead for Good podcast, and they went through the traction uh, kind of process, EOS, and
Yeah.
it was self-study, but smartly, they identified the misalignment. In order to get to their North Star, they first sort of understood through the sort of worksheets and whatnot where they weren't aligned, found alignment, and then continued to use some of those worksheets and whatnot to press forward to alignment. So to your point, whether you have a coach or you don't, you gotta be able to identify what's missing or where you're missing the alignment.
Yeah, because you're never 100% aligned. Even if you've been working together for 5 years, everybody's an A player, everybody loves each other, everybody can be sarcastic and beat each other up and support each other. We're humans.
Yeah.
So unless
I don't think that there's alignment
evolution,
ever. Yeah, without a process to bring people together, because everyone's gonna have different visions, different goals, different ideas of what the future should look like. So it's really helpful what you said. So let's end with this question. Like, what are the most practical steps a nonprofit leader can take today to get their team rowing in the same direction?
Cult Impact Group. Mean that, but let me give a little more than that. I'd say first do a little true self-reflection, real honest with yourself. And we all know that some of the hardest people we can be honest with is ourselves. Just had this conversation with my son about something the other day. So to really think about who you have on your team. Are they really high performers and high culture fit and activators? Are we really do we know where we're going? Really, a lot of the things that you brought up and that we talked about have that self-reflection, and you don't have to share that grade with anybody, but be really honest with yourself. And then I would say engage in some process with me, with another coach, on your own. Although, in addition to not the blind spot, when the organization head leads it, they can't participate, and there's huge value that gets lost. Just want to throw that in there. But to do, whether you call it a 2-day strategic planning retreat, whatever you want to call it, where you really understand where you're aligned and not aligned on everything from purpose and values and that long-term vision to 3 years and revenue goals and ownership of functions and what are those key capabilities. And, I'd say ask yourself this, if to all the nonprofit leaders out there. If you were to go ask your 3, 5, 7 leadership people, what's our number one priority for this year? What would the answer be? And if the answer isn't every one of them would say the same thing, you're not there. You might be amazing, you might be doing amazing things, doesn't reflect on you as a leader, but that's one of the real easy tests. And rarely, and I'll tell you, there should be one top priority.
One top. Right.
One top. There's other supporting, but there's little things when that nonprofit leader takes a step back, gets out of the weeds, gets rid of the noise, and just does some of the self-reflection, they'll probably self-identify some things, but they'll probably on their own, and then a lot more can be discovered, realize, wow, we can really improve alignment and all these other things we've talked about. And that's the purpose of either doing this work really seriously yourself or bringing someone in who can just make it happen quicker, better, more efficiently and effectively, so that you have that growth. And I tell everybody that I work with, well, yes, whatever you pay me hits the expense side of the ledger, just like we talked before. It's an investment. It's part of investing in your own growth as the leader, the growth of your team, and the growth of your organization.
Awesome. Well, Stuart, thank you for sharing all of this wonderful info, strategy, advice, guidance with the audience. Hey, if you want to connect with Stuart, check out the Impact Group, look it up. You'll find it. You'll find Stuart on LinkedIn, of course, and would encourage you to do so. But Stuart, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it. And to everyone out there in the audience, if you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. Also, check out the Mastering Fundraising podcast and the Lead for Good podcast. All of them interview exceptional leaders in the space and really dig into their expertise so we can all learn together. So until next time, thanks again for joining, and we'll see you around very soon.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.